We come to the second part of this discussion, and this discussion is whether this MSP hike will reap high yields in polls for the Bharatiya Janata Party. Will it happen, or can it happen? Will this make the farmers happy enough to perhaps vote in favor of the BJP, among other things, because of course farmer distress in all these three states was a major issue, definitely among the farmers. Sanjay Singh is a senior journalist, and so is Mr. Madhavan Narayanan. Let's quickly get their opinion. Mr. Sanjay Singh, what do you feel?
Sanket, in your initial remarks, you also talked about Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi. And I think that is something which I have seen on the ground that makes a difference in terms of how people perceive it on the ground, what difference it makes in their livelihood, and also around the input cost, and how it benefited the BJP during the polls in several states, parliamentary election in particular. Now, this MSP, of course, is a very, very sensitive issue. Each time an MSP hike is there, different farmer bodies express their disagreement with this particular thing. And also there was this very engaging debate discussion happening before we started, this section of your program started. So there are two issues. What farmers are saying, what political parties generally talk about. BJP had talked about, I think, 1.5% increase in from your input cost, say 50% increase from your input cost, and doubling farmers' income. I think in some of areas that is largely successful, if not 100%. In some areas, of course, like in terms of wheat, from what I gathered from the statement that was made yesterday by the government, that in terms of wheat, the hike or in terms of from input cost, whatever that gain is maximum. The point here is whether they will be able to convince people on the ground, the farmers on the ground, where these elections are going to happen, and will the opposition parties can raise this effectively, because mostly their argument is concentrated on loan waiver. Here there is no loan waiver. So therefore, I think that puts a very interesting matrix on the ground, where mostly Congress generally talks a lot in terms of loan waiver, and BJP will be talking in terms of MSP hike. Nonetheless, on the ground, this gives a good talking point, a substantive talking point for the BJP to let people decide on the subject and try and convince, of course.
Mr. Madhavan, your response. Do you feel that this will work in the elections?
Let me begin, Sanket, by saying something which any agriculture watcher should know. The basic aphorism that one man's price is another man's income. It's very important to know this, because BJP is always worried about inflation, because most of Indians are above the poverty line now. And therefore, inflation is more politically sensitive than agriculture prices. But the two of them are joined at the hip, which means that if you increase farm prices, it affects the urban votes politically. Second thing is that farm votes are not just about farmers who own land, it also about agricultural laborers and workers. There have been reports about the stagnation of wages in the agriculture sector for agricultural workers. And my calculation overall shows that the government has just about managed to protect in agricultural farmers from inflation. So and we've had enough arguments in the previous half of the show about how cost is calculated. So statistics don't reveal sufficiently. I agree with Sanjay that some of the atmospherics about like the Kisan Samman Yojana or the Kisan Credit Card, those kind of things can have a marginal impact, but nothing is a substitute for the core price issue, which translates as income. Now, let me come to the next part. There have been also three other factors which we have not discussed today. First is that the government has often cited the fact that there are WTO restrictions on subsidies that has kept in the first 5 years of Mr. Modi's rule. That was a key issue, I suspect. And therefore, some of these Swaminathan Commission related issues have been implemented only in the recent years. And so there is a overhang effect that has not been taken into account, not to speak of things like demonetization and COVID that have had their own impact on the agricultural workers or farmers' sense of welfare. So all these things together have an impact at the polls, and to that extent, the feel-good factor on agricultural workers as well as farmers is not, in my opinion, sufficient to give a sense of satisfaction. The truth may be somewhere in between what the farm union workers are saying and what the government is claiming. And in terms of voting, what it means is that it may vary from region to region, and
other factors.
And also, please understand, some of the issues are related to crop mixes. For instance, pulses have seen a much better increase than wheat. Wheat was supposed to be discouraged because of the fact that it is guzzling water, even for climate change reasons. Now, there was a valid point by the farmer leaders in your previous half. It's about diesel costs. There was a honeymoon for everybody in the first 5 years of Mr. Modi's rule because oil prices were lower. Now, oil prices have shot up. So, in a composite sense, including input costs, last but not the least, let me say, there has been a general stagnation, but last but not the least, real economists like Sukumai Chakraborty in the past have talked about terms of trade, which is about parity between agriculture and industry, because the farmer doesn't look just at the cost, although they talk about it. They also look at it as in terms of how do I stand vis-a-vis the urban people. So the GDP growth has been around 7% plus in the past decade or so, whereas inflation has been lower. So if your input, if your support prices are linked to inflation rather than national income, you feel a sense of being a laggard in the national progress. All this will play out in the election narrative. I have seen this in Punjab. Farmers are not just talking about farm prices; they are talking about lifestyles. So if you're not elevating them from livelihoods to lifestyles, that is the phraseology that I use to bring about there is always a peer group influence across the economy. Everybody likes to compare himself or herself with somebody that he or she considers to be her peer. If you look at all this, I feel that the voting pattern is just about, this is a saving grace for Mr. Modi. The impact of this MSP increase has to be felt. We are only 6 weeks away from the elections. All this, to me, it seems it's like a sort of a slog over shot in a cricket match. I would rather wait for ground level reactions, which may be less than the anger shown by the union leaders, but it is not a game changer or a match winner for Mr. Modi.
What is your assessment, Mr. Sanjay Singh, that fine, this brings in relief, but maybe the central government may be a bit too excited about the relief that it has provided to hope for reaping rich political dividends?
Sanket, anybody who provides relief, of course, would be excited and talk a lot about it, taken to be very natural. Madhavan Narayanji, I respect him a lot. He explained that portion very well. The fact remains that farm workers' kind of condition is also taken care of by the free food grace that is given to them post-COVID. That has contributed a lot in terms of their well-being, at least in terms of they don't have to care about their hunger. So that part is taken care of to an extent, about lifestyle and about how it impacts in terms of going to the polls. Of course, actual benefits, what people get have got over the years, and based on that, you assess a political party or a government's credibility. That okay, if this party or if this government is saying something, they will be delivering, or they will be, at least they have capacity and willingness to deliver. In that particular account, I think BJP has slight edge. BJP has quite an edge over the Congress. But then again, anti-incumbency and a whole lot of other factors come into play when it goes to election. But since you have done something substantive, you have announced this thing for Rabi crops, which will come into effect only months later. But announcement of this has been, BJP has done this since the time farmer agitation started. The BJP government, Modi government out here. we are announcing the MSP beforehand so that you actually know as when the product is there, what are you going to get. And therefore, they have announced this time. It's easy to link that with the kind of election will start very shortly when senior leaders, after nominations are over, would be going at the ground level, campaigning will start. But definitely, yes, this is a good talking point for the BJP in terms when in an election when this time around you see freebies are announced, like n number of freebies are announced, from giving the Congress party announcing like giving houses in Telangana, 250 square yard houses in Telangana to those who fought for Telangana state, to a whole lot of other freebies. In fact, the amount of freebies, if one calculates, that have been announced in a state like Madhya Pradesh, that would perhaps be equal or even go beyond the state budget. So a whole lot of factors would come into play. Of course, a good talking point for the ruling party at the center.
Okay, Mr. Madhavan's quick response, just 1 minute left.
Yeah, I quite agree with Sanjay that some of the atmospherics are critical. But it's very interesting that he mentioned that in agricultural subsidies, there will be, Mr. Modi speaks against freebies. But if you look at what Madhya Pradesh government has been doing, lots of freebies for farmers from both parties. Congress has been promising, Congress has been delivering in Chhattisgarh, which is next door to Madhya Pradesh. So there will be a lot of note taking from both sides on how much of these state government incentives are really working. So a lot of the decisions in voting will depend on the back of the envelope calculations that each farmer does. And there is a competitive sort of populism going on between Congress and BJP, because please understand, BJP's traditional plank of Hindutva is relatively less impactful in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, and to some extent even in Rajasthan. To that extent, agriculture becomes so important for the election that details matter. And both parties are showering subsidies. And like I like to joke, even LPG gas has become so important, they are firing on all cylinders. Therefore, this is going to be interesting. But yes, the incumbency factor is going to be critical. So people will have to, the incumbents will have to go that extra mile to impress farmers. And I don't see sufficient signs of that.
All right, Madhavan Narayanan as well as Sanjay Singh, thank you very much for joining us. With that, we have come to the end of this broadcast. News continues on the other side.